Yes, you read that right. Captain Toad Treasure Tracker has lore. Not a ton, I wouldn't advise you to play this game for the story obviously, but despite this being a simple, cozy puzzle platformer, it somehow also provides a unique backstory for a total of 3 different Mario games, and not exactly minor ones either. That said, it also somehow treats it in a very bizarre and loose way, like, it doesn't take it completely seriously, but at the same time, they also just could have not done this if they didn't want to set anything in stone. And add to that some really strange contradictions that are also somehow introduced, and you end up with lore that can only be described as flat out bizarre. Let's take a look. We're gonna start simple, because although Captain Toad is hardly a difficult or complex game, I would say it is an overlooked title from an already underperforming console, though the re-releases on 3DS and Switch definitely helped to save it from a truly forgotten fate. Looking at the sales data, the majority of you will probably only really be familiar with the good captain and the formula of his game through his inclusion in Super Mario 3D World. I mean, even though Captain Toad has sold a very respectable 3 million copies across all systems, Super Mario 3D World is at 20 million, so it's not at all close. But the fact of the matter is that if you have played 3D World, then gameplay wise, you know exactly how Treasure Tracker works. It just takes a little side mode from the big Mario on the Wii U and turns it into its own full-fledged game with a lot more levels to play, and most importantly for this video, a cute little story to go along with them. So to very quickly summarize the plot of Captain Toad, if you can even call it that, the game opens with the titular captain and explorer Toadette about to grab a Power Star, the main collectible of the game. A huge bird called Wingo then appears and takes the star for itself, which Toadette tries to prevent, but that well-intended move only leads to her being kidnapped by the main villain of the game. This is really the whole setup of episode 1 of Captain Toad, there is not much more to it. But yeah, what might be good to know is that this game is split up in different episodes, so to speak, which I guess can best be described as parts of the game. I want to call them chapters, but each episode is divided into chapters, so that's probably not the best choice of words on my part. Anyway, episode 1 revolves entirely around getting back Toadette from Wingo, and culminates in a showdown at the bird's watchtower. As you might expect, Toadette is saved and the duo continue their adventures leading to episode 2, which begins with a nearly identical setup, with the key difference being that it's now Captain Toad who ends up in Wingo's claws. Say what you want about that bird, he at least treats everyone equal. But as such, episode 2 has you play as Toadette throughout its levels. Story-wise though, it is essentially identical to episode 1. Now, huge spoilers ahead, but Captain Toad does end up being saved. Who would have thought? Meaning that for episode 3, you can now finally play as both Toad and Toadette. Although they are once again separated because Wingo kidnaps Toadette again, who uses her newfound confidence to fight back and free herself this time around. The two meet up again for a final battle, and after a third blow, as is Mario tradition, the boss is defeated. Now, obviously this is all not the lore I was talking about, so why am I explaining the whole story of the game? Well, because it is important to know that what I've currently explained is the exact same between every version of the game. The Wii U, Switch and 3DS all have this version of the story, no differences. However, we now arrive at a point where the two versions, since the Switch and 3DS game are identical, begin to differentiate, and without knowing the story of this game, you might not realize how completely bizarre what's about to come next is. So after you've beaten Wingo for the first time with your Wii U gamepad in hand, you'll watch as Captain Toad and Toadette step into a minecart and ride off, only for the captain to see a green star flying over and chase after it, leaving Toadette behind. Then, a very familiar cutscene starts to play. The intro of Super Mario 3D World. Except where it usually ends, it now continues with the green star falling into the clear pipe full Kobe style, and Captain Toad jumps after it, revealing that Treasure Tracker is a direct prequel to 3D World, which is such a neat little thing to include. In real life, it's obviously the other way around, but it is super cool that they decided to connect these titles like this. Nintendo is usually super hesitant to include anything that indicates the passing of time or something even remotely close to a timeline, but they actually did it here. The events of Captain Toad and Toadette fighting against Wingo happened just before the events of 3D World. Right? It's complicated. Remember how I said Nintendo doesn't like establishing timelines for Mario games like 20 seconds ago? Well, Captain Toad, more than any title ever, ends up being a very clear message to every fan out there that there is no real Mario timeline. And that may sound contradictory based on what we've just seen, but that's because we have only finished the Wii U version. If you beat Wingo with your Joy-Con or 3DS in hand, you'll see a similar ending of Toad and Toadette leaving in a minecart, but you might notice that this time around they are in the Sand Kingdom from Super Mario Odyssey. Instead of a green star, Toad sees the titular ship from the Switch game fly over and follows after that instead, which creates a bizarre situation where the events of Treasure Tracker are both the backstories of 3D World and Odyssey at the same time. Now, if you really wanted to, you could explain this by saying that Odyssey and 3D World don't necessarily need to happen in the same timeline, meaning that it is possible that the fight against Wingo precedes both at the same time, making it almost like a canon event of sorts. Captain Toad is apparently an essential part of the Mario story. It happens in every imaginable timeline. Now, obviously, Nintendo hasn't given this as much thought as I have now, but it is kinda crazy to me that they would alter the ending like this. It's so preventable. Captain Toad being a predecessor to 3D World makes so much sense. He is such an integral part of that game that linking it to Treasure Tracker is a very logical decision. Odyssey though, Captain Toad is barely in it. And to make matters even more confusing, the events as they play out in the ending of the port of Captain Toad are by all standards impossible. After all, in Odyssey, Captain Toad appears hidden in every single kingdom of the game, including the Cascade Kingdom and the Cap Kingdom, where Mario can find him before he ever sets foot in the Sand Kingdom. And yet, it is shown in this ending that Mario flying to the Sand Kingdom is what triggers Captain Toad to go explore them. That he hasn't previously been around the Odyssey Kingdoms is also supported by the fact that the Odyssey portion of the bonus episode begins with a Sand Kingdom based level and has a Cascade Kingdom themed one after that, implying that unlike Mario, Toad's first steps in the world of Odyssey were in the Sand Kingdom. So yeah, I can understand Nintendo tried to do a cute little nod to Odyssey here and perhaps lead the 5 people who had a Switch or 3DS and played Captain Toad, but not the big 3D Mario towards Odyssey, but they ended up creating an absolute mess of an ending that wrecks so much more than it ever did right. And worst of all, they had a perfectly fine ending right there in the original. But that isn't even all yet. Because while we may have just established Treasure Tracker serves as backstory for not 1, but 2 Mario games, let me tell you that there is actually a third as well. Now, it isn't as huge a convoluted mess as the other 2, but especially Odyssey are, fortunately, but it is a connection that has flown deep under the radar. Due to the success of the Switch version of Captain Toad, only that version received paid DLC, a new episode known as the Special Episode, which adds 5 new courses and remixes another 13. And with a new episode comes a new story, of course, where the duo are on the hunt for a new sort of treasure, the Super Crown. Yes, the bizarre power-up that spawned endless memes and suggestive artwork of a never-existing character called Bowsette technically originates from Treasure Tracker. It is implied, of course, that after this special episode, Toadette takes or learns the power of the Super Crown and uses it to transform into Peachette during the events of New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe, which was released a few months before the special episode. So if during that whole ordeal you saw a piece of artwork that you really wish you didn't, blame good old Captain Toad for that. After you complete the special episode, you are presented with the credits in a familiar setting. Once again, the duo drive down a mountain in their minecart, although there isn't a new cutscene to be found here. What is very interesting though is the locale where the minecart comes to a halt. A generic Mario grassland. But not just any generic Mario grassland, New Super Mario Bros. U generic grassland. While we aren't actually shown it this time around, I think we can fill in the gaps here and conclude that Toadette is the one to leave the cart this time around, joining up with Mario and friends when Peach gets kidnapped and uses the newly found Super Crown in order to complete their mission. As such, Captain Toad does not only serve as the setup for Mario 3D World and Mario Odyssey, with its final DLC, NSMBU Deluxe was also added to that group. However, it should be noted that there is a distinct difference here in how the endings are presented. The setups for the 2 3D Marios happen at the end of an identical story, making things quite confusing and inconsistent. The setup for New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe instead only appears after the special episode, of which the connection to the regular game isn't known. As such, it is completely possible, perhaps even plausible, that the special episode is set after the appearances of Captain Toad in either 3D World or Odyssey, depending on which timeline this is set in. So, to conclude, Captain Toad Treasure Tracker might be the only game in history to serve as a prequel to a total of 3 different games, which has unsurprisingly led to quite some inconsistencies and convolution. But at the end of the day, it is super cool that the devs decided to include these little nods. So Nintendo, if you're watching, please don't let my nitpicking detract you from doing this more often. Just don't completely change up the ending next time, okay? And that's about it for me, but please share your thoughts and theories on the endings of Captain Toad, as well as just your general impressions of the game in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel to stay updated on all my future Mario content coming up. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.